B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Monday, November 13th, 2017. We've got lots of news to comment on today, starting with a stunning report in the New York Times about the vulnerabilities of the National Security Agency, the fact that it's been hacked and its hacking tools are out there in circulation. And it's quite a piece. And what is stunning to me is that the same reporters who expose the weaknesses of the NSA, how it has concentrated too much on offensive hacking and cyber warfare at the expense of defensive activity. These are the same reporters, this is the same newspaper that is promoting the unproven conspiracy theories about Russiagate. And I find this just so rich and ironic. So let's start with the report, and then we'll get to Trump putting his foot in it and some of the reaction from the corporate media that occurred over the weekend. And I commend the New York Times, at least as far as it goes, that this is an interesting story that deserves to be public. And that is that the shadow brokers, this mysterious group that somehow obtained many of the hacking tools that the NSA has been using for years, including those that misdirect to make you believe that the hack may have been committed by, maybe Russia. Well, the article starts by profiling a fellow named Jake Williams, and he was a top-secret operative at the NSA in their most advanced group, the Tailored Access Operations Unit, or TAO. And he was working for a cybersecurity firm in Florida when the shadow brokers tweaked him in a tweet. And the tweak is that the shadow brokers were able to drop technical details that made it clear they knew who he was, that he used to work at TAO, which was a secret from everybody except those who worked at TAO, and that they knew about highly classified hacking operations that he had conducted. And this sentence is quite a whopper. America's largest and most secretive intelligence agency had been deeply infiltrated. And to this day, it's been several years since the NSA discovered the hack. They don't know who's responsible. They've arrested 3 people. You know about Reality Winner. You know about the guy in, I think, Maryland or Virginia, who had tons and tons of top-secret classified information at his home. And then there is the third one, a man who's described as a ethnic Vietnamese contractor to the NSA who is being investigated. But what we discover here is that our spooks are not very good sleuths. And they have not been able to determine how this happened. It's described as a grave setback for the agency. The ransomware that they developed has been widely exploited in many of the hacks that we're aware of. And experts believe more attacks using the stolen NSA tools are all but certain. And the shadow brokers, who use either broken English because that's the best they can do, or because it's a great way to misdirect who they are and to kind of cartoonize the spooks in our government. On October 16th, shadow brokers asked, and this is the broken English, is NSA chasing shadowses? And the post included a quote from George Orwell's 1984, a notation that the federal government's fiscal year ended on September 30th, the accusations of Russia creating bogus accounts on Facebook and Twitter. So the shadow brokers, whoever he or they are brazen in confronting and in humiliating our top spooks. Now, once again, Russia, Russia, Russia. Here's a quote from the New York Times article. Russia is the prime suspect in a parallel hemorrhage of hacking tools and secret documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence, posted week after week since March to the WikiLeaks website under the names Vault 7 and Vault 8. That breach, too, is unsolved. Together, the flood of digital secrets from agencies that invest huge resources in preventing such breaches is raising profound questions. Yeah, like who are you kidding? Some veteran intelligence officials believe a lopsided focus on offensive weapons and hacking tools has for years left American cyber defense dangerously porous. And Russell Tice, the former NSA analyst, who's been a guest on this program many times, he's indicated that the agency knew that the defenses, the firewalls and other efforts to prevent hacking of American-based networks and websites have been extremely weak. And Tice said they wanted to keep it that way. And we know that the agency, when they discover these zero-day vulnerabilities, new software is released, and they go through and find the vulnerabilities, they don't report it to Microsoft or to whoever created that software, because they hope to exploit it down the line. So this is a fascinating report. It's deeply embarrassing to our spook community. And they are still struggling to figure out how this happened, whether it is an insider leak or a very successful and sophisticated external hack. And of course, the irony is that's the question that I believe is pivotal to the entire Russiagate narrative, based on the claim that Russia was responsible for remotely hacking the DNC servers and spilling that information to WikiLeaks. Yeah, was it a leak or a hack? And the NSA is struggling with that. The CIA is struggling with that. And these are the very agencies that are so widely embraced when it comes to the publicly unproven Trump-Russia narrative. Now, over the weekend, Ted Lieu, who's a Democratic member of Congress from California, I believe he's on the Intelligence Committee, he said he has seen the same intelligence that Trump has seen that proves, he says, that Russia was responsible. And if that's the case, why can't we see any of that evidence and put to rest this cat and mouse game that they're playing with us? So as you probably know, Trump was in Vietnam. He's now in the Philippines, the final stop of his humiliate us again tour of Asia. And he tweeted and then commented to reporters about a conversation he had with Vladimir Putin. Trump said that he had again asked whether Russia had meddled in the contest, the election, but that the continued focus on the issue was insulting to Putin. Quote, he said he didn't meddle. I asked him again. You can only ask him so many times. I just asked him again. He said absolutely he absolutely did not meddle in our election. He did not do what they are saying he did. Now, it's fair to say that, at least in terms of their public credibility in the United States, Trump and Putin are both widely believed to be pathological liars. And I am no fan or defender of Putin. But I'll tell you a quick story that goes back to the invasion of Iraq. Dan Rather, then the CBS anchorman, got the last exclusive interview with Saddam Hussein before we hit the shock and awe button. And he listened to Saddam Hussein declare that he had no weapons of mass destruction. And I caught up with Dan after he'd been ejected from that anchor chair. This was in 2008 at a media reform conference in Minneapolis. And I asked Dan Rather, I said, when Saddam Hussein said that, did you ever think that he might be telling the truth? And Rather said, no. Because all the American sources indicated that he did have weapons of mass destruction. They were never found. That's another lie put forward by our intelligence agencies that are now held to be the standard of truth and credibility. As we discussed in our takedown of Rachel Maddow's smearing of Bill Binney last week, we're told that we should just just accept and embrace what these fact finders and dedicated Americans in the intelligence community tell us. And because Putin has been so heavily demonized, when Trump, who has zero credibility, says that Putin claims he didn't do it, well, most Americans just say, ha, my bullshit detector went off and these are lies. And it's the intelligence patriots who are telling us the truth. And Trump, he's hopeless, you know. He steps on his own toes all the time, and he craps his pants. And that's what he did here. He's being hoisted not on his own petard, but on his own sound bites. And Exhibit A here in the New York Times from Charles M. Blow, an op-ed columnist. I'll quote from it. Consider the strategic and historical magnitude of what Donald Trump said last week. He said he believed the intelligence conclusions of a nation hostile to this country, Russia, over the intelligence conclusions drawn by American agencies. Now, as I read this, I imagined Charles M. Blow standing, not sitting, in front of his computer keyboard as he composed this op-ed, with the national anthem blaring. He wouldn't take a knee. No, this is an expression of his patriotism. And so Blow, I think, exemplifies the common reaction. We saw the CIA tweeting. We saw the former spooks, Brennan and Clapper, populate the Sunday TV shows, all to tell you that Trump's full of shit. Just trust us. Back to Blow. The truth here is that we're seeing in real time how the president's personal paranoia impedes our national policy and our national interests. The uncomfortable fact here is that Trump is pursuing his own interests, not American interests. And on the question of Russia attacking our elections, Trump and Putin's interests align against the facts and against Americans. He continues, let's say this again as a clear declaration. Russia attacked our elections. Mr. Blow does not provide any evidence because we all know this. He goes on, they stole emails that were published and broadcast ad nauseum. They created and distributed propaganda on social media designed to exacerbate our divisions, content that was seen by nearly half the country. This is so hyped. And this is so irresponsible. And they cannot for a moment imagine that Putin and Trump actually are telling the truth about this. And Ray McGovern, the former CIA analyst who was a Russia expert, a Soviet expert at the agency back in the day, he writes at Consortium News, and I've linked to all of these articles in the show file for today's podcast, that mocking Trump doesn't prove Russia's guilt. And Ray opens, if the bloody debacle in Iraq should have taught Americans anything, it's that endorsements by lots of important people who think something is true don't amount to evidence that is actually true. If endorsements were the same as evidence, U.S. troops would have found tons of WMD in Iraq. So when it comes to whether or not Russia hacked Democratic emails last year and slipped them to WikiLeaks, just because a bunch of people with fancy titles think the Russians aren't guilty doesn't compensate for the lack of evidence so far evinced to support this core charge. He said what we got this weekend was all groupthink and no evidence. On Saturday, CNN responded to Trump's comment that Putin seems to mean it when he denied meddling by running a list of important Americans who have endorsed the Russian guilt verdict. And Adam Schiff asked the question, you believe a foreign adversary over your own intelligence agencies? And the stunning lack of evidence is only exceeded by the stunning lack of memory and the history of our intelligence agencies lying to members of Congress, to presidents, and others. And as I mentioned, the New York Times story on the NSA is written by Scott Shane, David Sanger, the Washington bureau chief, and Nicole Perlroth. And as I've mentioned, I've talked to Shane several times. He's a nice guy, an honest guy. He's got a lot of great sources in the intelligence community. He wrote the book about the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, the American citizen who was droned to death in Yemen, without any evidence ever put forward in a court of law or other forum to prove that he was an enemy of the United States. And I politely argued with Scott Shane about that. But he is content with his insider sources in the government, and that's what informs a lot of this commentary today. McGovern also talks about the smearing of Bill Binney, which we've covered in great detail here. And if you haven't seen Friday's Facebook video or listened to the audio from it, I encourage you to do that. If you've not yet listened to my hour-long interview with Bill Binney, where we go through the various smears that he's been subjected to, and he responds directly and candidly, well, I hope you'll find time for that. McGovern says despite the smearing of Binney, Trump appears to have taken some of the new evidence to heart. And, of course, he's a very unreliable figure in trying to get to the bottom of all this, and I freely acknowledge that. His claims and the tweets and the comments to reporters only make him look stupid because it has been framed this way. And over at Truthdig, Chris Hedges, the former New York Times and Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter there, has a very powerful essay today regarding the fact that the Justice Department has required the news broadcaster RT America to file under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, but not the BBC, not the China News Agency. Nobody from Tokyo has to register. Nobody from Paris Match. But RT does. And Hedges writes, the assault on RT, on which I host the show On Contact, has nothing to do with the dissemination of Russian propaganda. It's driven by RT America's decision to provide a platform to critics of American capitalism and imperialism, critics who lambast a system of government that can no longer be called democratic. And it's accompanied by the installation of algorithms by Google, Facebook, and Twitter that divert readers from left-wing and progressive and anti-war websites, including Truthdig. Left-wing critics already marginalized by the state must be silenced, he says, is the order of the day. It would seem, given how we are locked out of the corporate media and public broadcasting, that this assault is overkill. The corporate state has no counter-argument to its critics. The nakedness of corporate greed, exploitation, and repression is transparent across the political spectrum. And, he rightly notes, complicit in this censorship is a bankrupt liberal class. The institutions tasked with defending press freedom, ACLU, Human Rights Watch, Committee to Protect Journalists, along with major news outlets like the New York Times, have served as the corporate state's useful idiots. And what is their concern? It is not fake news, but the truth that ruling elites fear. And the truth is that these elites have destroyed the country and are traitors to democracy. They're desperately trying to shift the focus away from the cause of the political insurgencies on the left and the right: extreme social inequality. And he cites the intelligence assessment released on January 6th that took a hard line on RT, even using false information to accuse it. And they reported in a mocking way that RT often characterizes the United States as a surveillance state. And they allege that widespread infringements of civil liberties, police brutality, and drone use occur. And Hedges says, well, the U.S. is, in fact, a surveillance state. Civil liberties have been eviscerated. Police brutality is endemic. Our drone wars have made us state terrorists. But RT is the real cause, according to the people who know. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Billy Cook, Cheryl Fleming, Dick Atlee, and Ann Heyman just took out a second. It's actually Ann Bryant. She dumped the Heyman guy. Ann Bryant just took out a second subscription, an annual one, And she noted that she doesn't always agree with me. And Ann, that's what I like. I don't expect everybody to hang on every word I utter and believe it's all true. I hope to provoke you to think for yourselves, and if my opinions matter to you, that's good too. Join these people, will you, and take out a subscription? Come on over to peterbcollins.com. Just click on the menu button, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. You jump to the sign-up page, and in a couple of minutes, you can pick a subscription level that's comfortable for you and your budget. Well, Trump continues. He's on his last stop in Manila, and he's cozying up to the strong man who has promoted the vigilante killing of thousands of Filipinos who are suspected of drug use or drug dealing. It's a true mockery of justice. And Trump, of course, doesn't even hint about trying to counsel Rodrigo Duterte on the rule of law, the rights of the accused, and basic human rights. And according to Duterte's spokesman, Trump appeared sympathetic, didn't take any official position on the matter of the drug crackdown. He merely nodded his head, indicating he understands the domestic problem that we face on drugs, said Duterte's spokesman. The issue of human rights did not arise. It was not brought up. And also complicating this is that one of Trump's business partners, Jose E.B. Antonio, who is a Philippine developer, also the country's trade envoy to the United States, he's got Trump in a $150 million luxury tower deal in Manila, and he got to sit in on the meeting. And all of this is really embarrassing. And Thomas Frank, my friend who still owes me $5 for the bet that I made that Trump would win, he has a good column today in The Guardian. I've linked to it in the show file. I encourage you to read it. He says that the liberal clucking class, and I introduced the term clucking here, is aghast at what Trump says and what he does. And that the pundits pronounce him dangerous, fucking crazy, apologize for him to Muslims, compile long lists of his falsehoods and misrepresentations. They compare him to Hitler, Mussolini, Nero, Caligula. They are aghast, almost every one of them, and they compete fiercely with one another to say just how aghast they are. It is a parade of the aghast, Frank says. A solid year of the aghast has been a good thing overall. It's healthy for the country to have pundits periodically choose to despise our leaders instead of honoring them. But the parade of the aghast is also sharply limited. In the race to depict Trump in the worst possible light, the parade of the aghast conceives his iniquity to be a thing unique and unprecedented. Then he talks about the history of Republicans using fear, using division, attacking the press. And he concludes that this isn't going to fix the problem. That the parade of the aghast, for them, strategy is not the goal. A horror high is. And so its practitioners routinely rail against Trump's supporters along with Trump himself, imagining themselves beleaguered by a country they no longer understand nor particularly like. They scold and they scold and they scold. But if they really want to send Trump and the Republicans packing, they will make an effort to understand. And I'm aghast at the latest additions to Trump's wrecking crew. If you're on Facebook, perhaps you've seen repeated postings of the video interrogation by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island of one Kathleen Hartnett Wright. She comes from Texas, where she ran their Environmental Protection Agency. Just take a look at Houston after the flood, and you can see how lax they are. But Trump has appointed her to the Council on Environmental Quality, and she can't even answer basic questions that relate to the environment. But she does know that there's more than one position on climate change. Also, Trump has named the former president of Eli Lilly USA, the Indianapolis-based pharmaceutical company, to run the Health and Human Services Department. He worked there under George W. Bush, took a 10-year break to get rich in the pharmaceutical biz, and now he's back to give breaks to his drug-peddling buddies. It's disgusting. It truly is. When he was at Eli Lilly, he was apparently responsible, or at least didn't object to, the 345% increase in Humalog, a drug that millions of diabetics use to regulate their blood sugar. And over at Public Citizen, Peter Maybarduk, who is their director of access to medicines, said Eli Lilly is notorious for spiking prices of the century-old isolated hormone used in that diabetes medication. Oh, and there's one more. I mean, it's hard to keep tabs on all these people. But over at the EPA, the Senate has confirmed the fossil fuel lobbyist Bill Wareham, who now will oversee air pollution protections despite his clear record of working to undermine those very same protections. With only one Republican opposing him, he was confirmed by a 49-47 vote. And then there's a guy named Michael Dourson, the industry scientist that Trump has nominated to the EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. Resistance to his nomination is coming from red states that have been directly harmed by chemicals that Dourson has defended on behalf of industry. And the senators from West Virginia, usually a pretty reliable anti-regulation couple, Shelley Moore Capito and Joe Manchin, both have serious concerns. Manchin will vote against Dourson, but it probably won't make much difference. And likewise, in the Senate, I think there's really some significant regret that Harry Reid blew up part of the cloture rule as related to nominees for federal judgeships. And as the result, Republicans are able to ram through a series of really radically conservative white males, most who are under 50, who can be expected to wear the robes and hammer down that gavel for 30, 40, perhaps even 50 years. There are 18 appellate nominees so far. 14 are men, 16 are white. And they're packing the courts in a way that we haven't seen. This was greased by the Republican Senate majority during Obama's final 2 years, which not only blocked Merrick Garland as a Supreme Court nominee, but just refused to confirm any of Obama's appointees to leave the vacancies that Trump is now loading up with young white male conservatives. A couple of stories on immigration. 5 Democratic senators want to hold an additional hearing for the confirmation of Kirstjen Nielsen, Trump administration's nominee to lead the Department of Homeland Security. She was the deputy there to General Kelly before he was moved over to the White House. And she's seen as a real ballbuster. That's the description. But the issue has to do with some moves that were made related to immigration last week, with some interference from the White House, because there were last-minute efforts by Kelly and the Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert at the White House to persuade the acting Secretary of DHS to terminate the provisional residency of 57,000 Hondurans. Now, her name is Duke. I'm sorry, I don't have her first name handy here. But she did sign an order to end protections for about 2,500 Nicaraguans, but said she needed more information about the Hondurans. And it's a very dangerous country in Honduras, and to just summarily deport 57,000 of them seems pretty damn cruel to me. And cruel is the watchword for the announcement last week, the abrupt cancellation of a program that gave young people fleeing violence in Central America the chance to apply for asylum here. They gave 24-hour notice for about 5,000 children covered by the Central American Minors Program, who had fled from Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador, countries where young people are routinely murdered because of gang activity. And so these are death sentences for many of these people. But we don't care. And one last insult to immigrants. You know about the DACA program, and they set up a deadline of October 4th. No, October 4th or 5th. Let me get it right here. October 5th was the deadline. And the paperwork for one young person in New York City was prepared by the Legal Aid Society and sent by certified mail long before the October 5th deadline. But when they tracked the package, they showed it arrived in Chicago on September 16th. That's where these are being processed. But the package started circling Chicago in a mysterious holding pattern. From September 17th to the 19th, it was in transit. Then its tracking whereabouts disappeared until October 4th, when it was on its way, and then it was delivered one day beyond the deadline on October the 6th. And this was not the only case. According to lawyers from across the New York region, in at least 33 other cases, unusually long Postal Service delays resulted in rejections of DACA applications. The fix is in. You remember back on Inauguration Day, there were a group of protesters, some 200 of them, who were rounded up and accused of essentially rioting. The evidence is very slim. And the federal prosecutors have demanded access to Facebook accounts of anti-Trump activists who challenged search warrants for their information, but who are not suspects in this case and presumably were not even in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day. Now, the ACLU argued that the warrants for their Facebook data were overbroad and the prosecutors shouldn't have broad access to the account data, but in a judgment released today, D.C. Superior Court Judge Robert Morin ruled the government could conduct the searches with some limits. The Fourth Amendment is reeling from this latest body blow. Navy SEALs are suspected in the death of a Green Beret in the nation of Mali this past June. Now, at first they said, it was a wrestling match, and one of the guys just accidentally put this guy in a chokehold. There was also some other scenario that was advanced. But the investigators are concerned that the man who was killed, Staff Sergeant Logan Melgar, a 34-year-old veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan, he was in Bamako, Mali, in embassy housing that he shared with 2 Navy SEALs, and he wound up dead. Now, an American service member who knew Melgar said he was under the impression the sergeant had stumbled on some sort of money-skimming scheme involving the SEALs. And they are given bundles of cash to pay off the families of people who had a loved one killed. But this one will follow. It deserves deep investigation. And I want to wrap up here with a couple of statistics. If I were USA Today, these would be spiffy little color graphs. The rate of reported hate crimes in the United States increased last year from 5,800 the year before to 6,100, so an addition of 300 reported cases. The increase is the second year in a row. And the largest share of victims, 6 out of 10, were targeted because of bias over the victim's race or ethnicity. There's been a rise in the number of crimes targeting Muslims and Jews. Anti-Semitism, said to be the leading cause, motivating about 55% of the episodes, 25% aimed at presumed Muslims. The number of hate crimes triggered by bias against racial or ethnic background rose from 3,300 to 3,489. And I believe this is fueled by Trump and the media coverage of many of his hateful tweets and political commentary. And the last statistic I have for you today is a positive one. A recent report shows that in California, Women are earning 88% of what men are being paid, this according to a study conducted in 2016. And the pay gap at 88% is bested by New Mexico and Vermont. Actually, New Mexico is at 88%, and Vermont it is 90.2%. So we're making some progress there against the glass ceiling, and I hope that'll continue. Thanks for joining me for my daily news and comment podcast. We give it away free, and you're free to share it with absolutely everyone. It's also posted every day on YouTube for ease of access. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.